Yeah, I was in China recently, and one commentator said to me that the U.S. has spent billions of dollars with bombs. Let's try investment in development for a while and see what happens. Leela, in Paris, just to round off this segment, what do you think the reaction is going to be, given it's election year in Paris? What do you think the reaction is going to be to this attack in London? Is it more moving to the right? Is it embracing the fact that Europe is a diverse place where these attacks will happen and everyone has to keep calm and carry on and react as normal?
Well, I mean, from the point of view of France, it was, let's admit it, this attack, tragic as it was expected. And, I'm sure in some quarters of the British establishment, it was at least, it was not a mass, the killings were low. So, and France has become very used to this. We've had a number of attacks that have been thwarted because of heightened security measures. But what is really important right now, because time and again we're having these attacks, the same patterns are repeated. Even the media has started to cover it in these repeated patterns. This is disassociated from what is happening in the Middle East. This is a European phenomenon. And we are now at the stage where we have had some radicalization programs in France and in the UK. And we even have officials who have quit these radicalization programs because they are not achieving what they have to be achieving. And I think that's where we really need to focus this, because enough of ISIS directed, we've discussed this. We know the trends. We really have to be talking about the solutions and sort of disassociate the fact of bringing Islam into this. This is criminal. These are people being so-called radicalized in prison, and they're converts. They don't really know Islam at all.
I think that's a good point to end this discussion. There was another big trip in the last week or so, and that was the new U.S. Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, going to Northeast Asia, Japan, then the Republic of Korea, and then 2 days in Beijing. Let's go to Beijing. Qinduo Xu, what do you think Rex Tillerson achieved on all three legs of that trip?
Well, I think obviously, his stops in Tokyo and in Seoul is really to boost the confidence of the U.S. Allies in Japan, South Korea, that the U.S. will be with them with the threat from the North Korea. And with his arrival in Beijing, this is pretty significant, of course. The China-U.S. relationship, many people say this is the most important. And there's a lot of uncertainty as we are waiting for the upcoming summit between President Xi Jinping and Donald Trump in the United States. So they are going to work out, a major strategy or long plan how to manage this very important relationship.
I want to stay with you just for a second, because the criticism back here of Rex Tillerson was that he said something different in every capital. He said what the Japanese wanted to hear in Tokyo. He said what the Koreans wanted to hear in Seoul, and the same in Beijing. What do you think about that?
Well, I think, he's a diplomat, and he offers basically, what the country they need, like in Tokyo. I think that's not really off the track or off the tradition from U.S. policy toward Tokyo or from U.S. policy towards South Korea. I think, people did talk a lot about what he said in Beijing. That's pretty significant. He talked about, China-U.S. relationship can only be defined by friendship and cooperation. That's also the view from the Chinese side. This is a more strategic point of view, and this is a more long-term view. And he said, China-U.S. relationship cannot be defined by any single event, like what's happening in North Korea or South China Sea, things like that. That's absolutely true. And also he talked about, the essence of the so-called new type of relationship between major powers, basically no conflict, no confrontation, mutual respect, and win-win cooperation. This is also, I think, this Chinese side is totally agreed with him in terms of how to look at this relationship. It's complex. They have a lot in common in terms of interests, but at the same time, they do have differences. It's really about how to manage the differences in order to bring peace and stability, not only for the two countries, but also for the East Asia, Northeast Asia, I mean, whole Pacific region, and to that extent, probably the global situation, the whole world.
Brian, Chinese diplomats were very happy with the language that Rex Tillerson used because Americans said it was pretty similar to the way China had talked about this before. You've been to DPRK, North Korea. You're kind of an expert on the peninsula, but we still have this raging issue, which the tensions are still very, very high, and the deployment of the THAAD ballistic missile defense system is still not solved. So if there is this meeting in early April, as US media has reported, yet not confirmed, between President Xi and President Trump here in the United States, the language is good about win-win cooperation going forward, but there's a lot of problems still to deal with now.
Yes, even the Washington Post condemned Tillerson for using the language that the Chinese also use, like win-win, et cetera. But I agree with you. I think the big issue right now, the biggest single issue, is what's going to be Trump's foreign policy towards DPRK.
And we don't know because it's in review, right?
We don't know, but Rex Tillerson said, when he said the policy of strategic patience has ended, he said it very decisively, like, we're going forward. And at the same time, he said all options are on the table, indicating that there could be even the possibility of a preemptive attack against DPRK nuclear facilities. That, of course, I don't think that that's what's coming necessarily, but talk like that only ratchets up, in the case of DPRK, its own preparations, its own ability or desire to take countermeasures. It's the wrong way to go. If you're going to have a real examination of U.S. DPRK relations, which is what China was urging, and the Trump administration said out of hand, no, we're not going to do that, meaning have an exchange. You suspend the military exercises and DPRK suspend its nuclear weapons program. Trump said no, but that's where this must go. In order to, DPRK is not going to become a non-nuclear power, but can their nuclear program be capped, and in exchange, normalized relations and a peace treaty, which is what the DPRK really wants. They want the Korean War to end once and for all.
Yeah, security guarantees in return for denuclearization, which has been going on since the U.S. Clinton administration. Afshin, how does the rest of the world look at this? Because, you know, Asia is rapidly becoming, you know, the most dynamic area economically, but also security-wise, the one that's raising the most eyebrows. Where does U.S. policy go from here if Rex Tillerson is using language that strategic patience is over? What can replace it, considering we've been down this road before?
Sure. No, I think there's a lot of concern around the world. If you talk to diplomats around the world, there's a lot of concern about tensions in the South China Sea. There's just a lot of concern about the U.S.-China relationship, Nathan, because when you think about it, there's really four things that matter to the global economy on a macro level. It's the U.S. economy, it's the Eurozone, it's China, and it's oil prices. And if U.S. and China, remember, campaigner Trump was talking about high tariffs, was talking about, labeling China a currency manipulator. It seems we've gone past that. So I think there's a lot of, sighs of relief, actually, in chancelleries around the world and palaces around the world, because nobody wants a confrontational relationship between the United States and China. These are two big economies. Asia's middle class is driving consumer growth around the world, and nobody wants to see that region lit up.
Afshin, you're a little bit optimistic here because we still don't know what the trade policy is going to be. There seems to be this argument, doesn't there? Let's bring in Leela in Paris because, we had the German Chancellor here, Angela Merkel, with President Trump, and the one thing she really wanted to know, of course, was trade as well. After the sort of NATO mess seems to have solved itself, at least for now. Is that what Europe's looking at now? Is obviously the trade deal seems to be dead, but is there going to be this sort of economic nationalism?
Well, I mean, Europe is in a very particular stage right now. France is heading in for an election. We ourselves do not know who is going to be in the Elysee presidential palace. Would it be Marine Le Pen? Would it be a centrist leader? But I mean, what we are seeing and what we saw after Merkel's meeting with Trump is the sheer bafflement of heads of state who meet with Trump. They really don't know what they're getting into and what they're getting out of these meetings. You know, Angela Trump's press conference was famously late. You know, German press conferences are never late. So as with everything, Europe is still trying to figure out what is the U.S. foreign policy. You know, Trump says one thing, his Secretary of State says the other, and we are scrambling.
Qinduo Xu in Beijing. I want to move on. Well, it's the same subject, really. President Xi and President Trump may meet early April. We talked about strategic patience being over in terms of the DPRK, but China has sort of had a strategic patience ever since sort of November when Trump was elected, and there was some phone calls with a leader in Taiwan. There was, do we really have to stick by the one China policy? They seemed very calm, but then when he was elected, there was the letter and then the phone call, and then, you know, Rex Tillerson's visits and Yang Jiechi's visit, of course, the state councillor here, and things seem to be moving in a good direction. So what's the view from Beijing? Is it better than we thought? And is this potential meeting going to continue that? Or is this meeting everything? Like, for example, perhaps a comparison to September 2013, when then U.S. President Barack Obama and Xi Jinping met in Sunnylands, California?
I would say it's more about the long-term like management of this bilateral relationship. You know, when Rex Tillerson was in Beijing, he talked about to the Chinese leaders you know, this has been more than 40 years since the two countries established full diplomatic ties. So they are looking at the next 50 years. That's his words. You know, we should set the blueprint for the next 50 years of China-U.S. relationship. So that could be the subject between Xi and Trump about how to look at this relationship. You know, as China rises and the U.S. is still the dominant power in the globe, there's a lot of speculation and concern about how they are going to manage their relationship. And this is a strategic, so this is very important. And also, secondly, there are obviously some substantial issues to be touched upon. For example, North Korean issue. From the Chinese side, they are still pursuing diplomacy, still pursuing talks. As the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said, you know, talks deserves another chance. You know, peace is still within our grasp. Obviously, China is trying to persuade or pressure North Korean side to back off from more missile tests. At the same time, China is to explain to the U.S., you know, thought system and the military exercise is not helpful to this tension in North Korean peninsula. And also, trade issue will be up between the two men. Obviously, you know, Donald Trump talked a lot about the trade deficit from the U.S. side. I think China probably will make some concessions to alleviate that concern. China could buy more stuff, more products from the United States. It's really about whether the U.S. is ready to sell, for example, the high-tech products to China.
It's going to be fascinating, and we're going to be covering it wall to wall, I can assure you. This is the time of the show where we put you on the spot and ask you all, what's the next big story coming up for you guys? Let's start with you, Ash.
Well, I think Brexit is the next big story. Next week, Theresa May is going to invoke Article 50, which is going to start the process. You have to invoke Article 50 to start the process of negotiation for the United Kingdom to exit the European Union. Every study that has been shown, and even those studies that show that Brexit could be good for the United Kingdom long term, they mirror a trade deal with the European Union. The European Commission has essentially told the world they're going to punish the UK. The sun is setting on the United Kingdom, one of the great trading nations of the world.
And they only have 2 years to do it. Brian, quickly.
Right. The next big story, I believe, will be the eviction of ISIS from Mosul, the second biggest city in Iraq, and also a concerted U.S. military effort along with the Kurds to weaken and then oust ISIS from the Raqqa, the caliphate capital in Syria.
Qinduo, quickly, what's the next big story? The Xi-Trump visit?
Yes, obviously that's the biggest story from the Chinese side. The two sides are working together to prepare for the upcoming trip. I think it's about really the agenda, what will be the top priority, what will be a series of topics, you know, whether they can agree on any specific issues, whether there will be any agreement to be signed by the two sides. That would be interesting to watch.
Leela, your perspective from Paris, next big story, quickly.
I think it'll be the Turkish referendum. It's on April 16th, but in the week to come, we're going to see some tussling between Ankara and the EU.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that's not been on everyone's radar. That's it. Great panel. Thank you so much.